Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. We've got a super special guest today. He has been the director of SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement since 2010. He's an associate with SFU's Center for Dialogue, SFU's Institute for the Humanities, and he is co-director of SFU's Community Engaged Research Initiative. He's also an award winner. He won the 2020 Warren Gill Award for Community Impact, and his name is Dr. Johal. Join me in welcoming Am. Welcome, Am.
Hey, Thomas, great to be here.
Ready for 20 questions?
You bet.
Okay, here we go. Number one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
um, I tried to make change in the world, and I've tried to do that in different ways, I guess. I started out doing work when I was a university student, when the newspaper, the UBC, was shut down, working with a group of people to try and get it set up as an independent organization. A group of us ran for the student union as a kind of protest slate, and we accidentally ended up getting elected, and then had to go about trying to implement what we were trying to do. But eventually ended up doing a project with a friend of mine, Allison Dunnett, a project at UBC called Humanities 101, which was a free liberal arts program for residents of the downtown east side. And I later on went on to work in government, in the civil service, but also on the political side, and later on with nonprofits that were doing work trying to maintain public health care as a public idea rather than a private one. I worked with the BC Health Coalition. I also started a coalition raising concerns and issues with the 2010 Olympics and their impact on gentrification and housing displacement. So done various things over the years, including working in human rights in the Middle East. I worked with a Palestinian NGO named the Mosawa Center for a year. But for, I guess, the more recent history, I've been attached to SFU since they moved the School for Contemporary Arts from Burnaby Mountain down near the inner city of Vancouver. And so I sort of work at the intersection of university and community.
That's super great. Just a note for our audience, in case this is your first episode, you might want to have a listen to the last one, which was with Dr. Ron Wakari, who teaches also at SFU, but in a very different department. And so we'll go to question 2 here. What's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
It's hard for me to determine what makes me different. I feel like it's other people that would be a better judge of that. But I think what I've at least tried to do in the way that I work, both with grassroots organizations and inside of the academy, is both to be linked with communities that are doing work on the ground, but also to have relationships in the theoretical world, in the academic world, and otherwise, to see where these things can be brought to bear on each other in a way that advances the causes of work happening on the ground, but also helps with the kind of thinking happening in the academy, within social movements and otherwise. And I think that's the kind of space I feel the most comfortable in and energized by all of these worlds, by working at the institution. I can't leave my community roots or relationships. In fact, they become even more important to keep you grounded in the work that you're doing.
Awesome. One more note for the audience. I came to know Am's work as a student, as a master's student. He was teaching one of the electives that I could have taken, but I wasn't able to take. And he also runs a podcast, and I think you're our 3rd podcast host. Number 3, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
I think I don't know what else I would do. I think a lot of things with life, you don't have a big master plan of what you're up to. You fall into things, and those experiences shape you and influence you. And I think one thing about growing older as well is just, you gravitate towards the things that you're interested in. There's not really like an option of doing something else. And so in many sense, you follow the things that get you up in the morning. And for me, this type of work has been deeply enriching in terms of the kinds of relationships that I've been able to be a part of, and to be able to work collaboratively at the intersection of these spaces. The universities are neoliberalized. There's many criticisms of university, but they're also sites of possibility. And I think we need to not just evacuate these spaces, as problematic as they might be, and that there are still these places of agency, places of thinking, and wonderful people who are trying to think through difference and trying to advance the cause of social justice. And so to me, that's deeply interesting about being in these places and to be supportive of social movements.
That's great. I think as we go through the questions, you'll find that some of them touch on inspiration and kind of reach out in that way. But number 4, what does your future look like?
Oh, that's a really intense question, because I think in a time like this, it's hard to even think past the present, just with the intensities going on. And, I had recently had a chance to interview Walida Imarisha, who co-edited a book with Adrienne Marie Brown. And part of their argument is that, we need to actually engage in science fiction and speculative fiction, because that's how the present world gets changed, by imagining a different tomorrow. And so I think for me, that's really inspiring to think of those words about how we can change the present by creating a radical imaginary, and to not just think that these development trajectories and politics of today, the authoritarian populism and otherwise, is some sort of natural state that happens, that we can actually organize in and around these crises that are here, because people have done that before. We're standing on the shoulders of people who have organized through amazing resistance, and I think that we have a lot of opportunity to shape the world that happens. So to me, it's imagining being in community with people in a world that's more just.
That's great. I think as you're asking that question, some might interpret it as touching on ethics or ethics in design. There's a great guy who deals with design ethics named Morton, who works with LinkedIn Learning. I'm trying to wrangle him onto the show. Number 5, and this one's a bit unique to this podcast. Let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Yeah, I think I've worked in different contexts and places as well. Downtown East Side neighborhood is one place that I've had a relationship to in various ways, be it in public policy work. The School for Contemporary Arts is located here. I live in Strathcona, so that's an aspect to it. Of course, being in a Canadian colonial context, where there's been just the brazen theft of lands from Indigenous peoples, the colonial context that we are in today isn't some moment in the past, but very much in the present and ongoing. And those aspects are clearly baked into the politics of this place. So it's hard to organize or do work without centering those kinds of questions in how we work, who we work with, and how ideas move forward. In a city like this, where the Sanak development is about to happen, where Indigenous communities have finally gotten just a portion of their land back to be able to do development of that scale and size in a city that needs rental housing stock. It's really inspiring to see projects move forward like that. So I think being in this city, in this region, within that historical context, gives a lot of shape to what makes politics maybe a little bit different or a little bit unique than other parts. So to me, when I worked, for example, in Haifa with the Palestinian organization, also a very complex political context in the occupied territories, West Bank, Gaza, and the situation of the Palestinian minority within the Israeli context as well. That also, as an outsider working within that context, and learning from people who are doing the work on the ground, that's also shaped how I approach human rights work as well.
That's great. We get a lot of different kinds of answers to the place question. Some of them talk about being stuck in the apartment and being defining place in that way. Some people talk about the different geographic locations that they can be in at the same time, being on Zoom. But we don't often actually hear about the bigger ideas around place like your answer was. So I think that's great. Number 6, if you had to start from scratch, what advice would you give your former younger self?
No, I feel like I sort of stumbled onto things, but I would probably just say keep going.
Nice. 7, what's a day in your life like?
There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of meetings, both in person, coffees, Zooms. Just living in the neighborhood that I work, I just randomly run into people as well on the walk into work and back. I sit on the boards of a few nonprofit organizations, mostly arts and cultural organizations, and so it's a full day of being very social. This type of work requires you to be in conversation with many people simultaneously, and so a lot of it's talking and listening. The listening part's probably double or triple the talking part, but that's definitely a big part of the day, sort of planning public events, having guests on a podcast, getting ready, developing ideas, giving advice when people ask for it. Those types of things are there, but it's deeply just because of the types of people that you meet that are initiating projects, and just being at the intersection of arts and social change. Being around artists, activists, academics, and others has been a deeply enriching part of the work that I'm able to do.
That's great for our listeners who aren't in Vancouver. SFU, Simon Fraser University, has a couple of really key campuses downtown. One's at Woodwards and one's at Harbour Center, and it's just been running between the two campuses to join us. So, number 8, lifelong learning is a popular topic these days. How do you stay up to date?
Yeah, sometimes that term gets thrown around. I don't always know exactly what it means, but I think I grew up in small town Canada in Williams Lake in the interior, and my parents hadn't really gone to post-secondary, and so to go to university was a deeply alienating experience, and not really knowing exactly what it was. And so I struggled through my undergraduate years. And I did a master's much later in my early 30s in Hungary. And then later on, a PhD in communication and media philosophy at the European Graduate School, which I didn't finish till I was in my early 40s. And I just did a course this summer with Achille Mbembe, who is sociologists and theorists based in South Africa. And so to me, I'd always been around theory my entire life, but I'd never really done it in my undergrad. And so when I ran and saw books and read them, I was always drawn to it. And to be able to have the privilege of being able to study it later in life has given me a kind of thirst and passion for staying engaged with philosophy and theory in a way that I wasn't able to do when I was in my early undergraduate days. And so for me, a lot of that has meant, engaging in theory. To me is a very practical exercise, because I think it opens up new ways of thinking, looking at problems in a different way, and to stay with those conversations, because theory also evolves. And so for me, being able to continue with that, to finish a doctorate later in life has been deeply enriching, and I've continued to stay as current as I can as my time and allows me. But I don't know if I call it lifelong learning or not, but I'm still, staying engaged with people, attending seminars, and in this moment of the pandemic as well, where things are more readily available virtually, it's actually been more accessible in a strange kind of way, at least in some ways. And so that's been really important to stay with what's happening.
That's great. Maybe I should give a shout out to SFU's Graduate Liberal Studies program, where I just finished my master's and where Am's been teaching. I think it's safe to say they embrace the idea of lifelong learning. They are offering a not entirely in person, so mainly Zoom-based cohort coming up. Really great program, definitely worth registering on that one. But number 9, what tools do you use? Are you entirely digital? Do you use some analog tools?
When we started the Below the Radar podcast, we had a small office at 312 Main, this old police station that's been renovated, and a number of community organizations have moved into it. So we were exclusively doing in-person interviews and had a number of wonderful people working with me who were technologically sophisticated, but we weren't really doing interviews with people outside of Vancouver. And as the pandemic hit and we weren't able to do public programming or talks in person, we shifted to virtual, and that actually opened up opportunities to speak with people, halfway around the world as part of our programming. And so we've shifted, and we still do in-person interviews occasionally, but for the most part, they have been online, and that's really allowed us to reach new audiences, and also, a listenership in the US and the UK, Germany. For some reason, we have a big listenership in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know exactly why, but we'll take it. And so that's really interesting when we hear back from audiences elsewhere. And also with public programming that we're doing, there's just an expectation that events are going to be hybrid. So if they are in person, there's a kind of expectation from an accessibility point of view that it will be live streamed, and there would be some aspect of participation built in. So I think, coming out of the pandemic, this is just one of the realities of doing events in public, that there's at least some level of expectation. When you can, it would be good to live stream those opportunities.
We had a great set of significant set of viewers coming from Hong Kong last month, probably because of our guest Keith Tam, who's a major name in the design education world there. That was a great one. And so we're halfway there, and some people dislike this question, but I'll ask it. How do you deal with work-life balance?
Probably not well is the best way of describing it, but I've just come back from being away for a month, and so I'm just as busy as I was before, but I'm just in a way better mood. And it was my first trip after the pandemic. I'd been to the States a couple of times. I gave a talk in Ohio and went to a conference in Portland, but this was, going away for a month. I was in Berlin and Strasbourg and Nice, went to the Biennale in Venice. I only had a one-way ticket, and eventually the easiest way for me to get back was through Lisbon. So I spent a week in Lisbon as well. Mm-hmm. And so after, coming back from that and just being in a better mood, it's like you actually do have to carve out time away from both work and voluntary obligations to, keep up with your relationships and have a different sense of time, so that you can actually repair yourself in ways that you don't even realize that you're broken. And the pandemic has affected all of us in various ways, and sometimes we forget how many anxieties we have embedded inside of us through this strange time that we've all collectively been through. But I would say, I think it's important to just be physically away from work, and secondly, to have interests and passions that are outside of those things as well, because I think, I took up tennis during the pandemic, which I hadn't played in 20 or 25 years. It was like the perfect socially distanced sport. And I don't think I'm particularly good at it, but it was something that got me outside and getting physical, and was a great way to socialize with friends I hadn't seen. So it's been really great to pick up new hobbies along the way.
That's great. You know, here in Vancouver, we're so lucky with pandemic and how it's treated us. But now with travel really opening up, it does bring a sense of hope, and makes me want to get on a plane. 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
Oh God, I don't know what I would be doing. I don't know if I have a choice to do something else. I was originally going to be a PE teacher when I went to university. That was like my big ambition in life, and I went in a different direction. I was hanging out with my lefty friends in the student union, and then I briefly thought, oh, I'm going to go into business, and that was also I proceeded to get a commerce degree, and I've never worked in business since then. So as I said before, you eventually gravitate towards the things that interest you, and I was interested in doing community work and social justice work, and being around ideas. And so eventually, and I was very much interested in arts and culture as well, but I did that through voluntary work when I was doing more organizing work. So, in this strange way, being at SFU now, working out of a school for contemporary arts, I feel like I'm around the artistic, the political, and the social all the time. And it works in different ways, but to me, it's been enriching to have these different interests, to be able to inhabit these within a work context, because it doesn't feel like work actually. So that's the other beautiful thing about it.
We had a great guest recently named Yasmin Hoofer, who's just kind of early on in her career, just starting. And she also shifted from being an athlete into going into the more academic side. I wonder if that's a thing. Number 12, what would you not like to do career-wise?
uh, I wouldn't. I probably couldn't be a lifeguard because I don't swim very well. I don't think I want to be working for Elon Musk, for example, or Jeff Bezos, where vast sums of money have been accumulated through means of exploitation. I think that would be something that would be very difficult for me to do.
13, what's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
If you find work that you love, you won't work a day in your life.
Right, that one. 14, what's your least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Anything that Donald Trump has ever said.
Okay. 15, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would you choose?
Curious.
16, what keeps you up at night?
Climate change, and social inequality. Those things are constantly on my mind.
Final stretch here, 17, what's a dream you're chasing?
A more just world.
What inspires you?
Communities engaging in resistance against all odds.
Any advice you'd like to share?
Despite the world having all of these crises where things seem completely intractable, there's always different ways that we can all make a difference, in ways that can make the world a better place and to change conditions on the ground. And we should always keep trying.
And 20, and maybe my favorite question, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? What's a good call to action? What should we be doing?
I think that people ought to be agitating in whatever way makes sense for themselves. I think politics is something that happens outside of the state and outside of political parties, and every now and then interventions into those fields are important too, but it's important to begin with the politics that exists outside of the state, because then it comes from a real place and from the durability of communities that in politics, people will disappoint you, but at the end of the day, if you're intervening from the perspective of communities, you're going to stay longer in the world of the duration that politics requires to make change.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Am. Great having a chat with you. You know, you have ideas, academic and otherwise, that are so important, and you know, you get your recognition from that. But I think today we really saw the kind of you that we could see in a podcast. So really great to have you on.
Yeah, wonderful to be on your podcast, Thomas.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Take care.